All right, diving right in today, we've got some really interesting stuff to unpack, about Zelensky. Some listeners sent us this analysis of how his rhetoric, his whole approach seems to have really shifted. It's gotten like way more intense recently. What do you think?
Yeah, it's fascinating, really. This piece we're looking at is from a Russian commentator, and they make a pretty compelling case that this shift in Zelensky's his whole style, it's not just for show. It's a calculated move. It's about power, both on the global stage and back home in Ukraine.
Okay, so let's give our listener a bit of a rundown. You set the stage here. We're talking about Zelensky, president of Ukraine, who at the beginning of the war was all about trying to find a peaceful solution, right?
Yeah.
Appealing to the world for help, but also trying to reason with Putin,
Exactly. And now, I mean, he's practically writing Putin off entirely, saying things like negotiations are just completely off the table, flat out.
Yeah, and not exactly mincing words either, using some pretty strong language for a world leader, I mean.
Well, exactly. That's the whole point. It's deliberate. He's sending a message, and this commentator argues that message is twofold, really, serving two main objectives.
Okay, I'm hooked. Break it down for us. What are these objectives?
So, objective number one, he's trying to project strength. On the international stage, he wants to show the world that Ukraine is in this for the long haul, that they're not backing down, they're not going to compromise, and they're certainly not going to give in to Putin.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. Playing to the global audience, rallying support, showing that they're united and determined makes sense. But what about domestically? What's going on back home?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. See, the commentator, they suggest that Zelensky is also trying to outmaneuver some of his political rivals back home, specifically former President Petro Poroshenko.
Okay, so for our listener who might not be, completely up on Ukrainian politics, could you give us a little background on Poroshenko? What's his deal?
Sure. So Poroshenko, he was president from 2014 to 2019, and he's always taken a much more hawkish stance, against Russia right from the get-go. Very hardline. He's been pretty critical of Zelensky, actually, especially early on when Zelensky was, trying to negotiate. He basically said Zelensky was being way too soft.
So now Zelensky's almost like stealing a page from Poroshenko's playbook.
Yeah.
Trying to one-up him.
Exactly. He's appealing to that same base, the hardcore supporters of the war effort, the ones who think any talk of negotiation is weakness. And by taking this hard line, he's potentially drawing support away from Poroshenko, consolidating his, own power base.
Yeah. Okay. I see. It's a risky move, though, right? Trying to walk this tightrope between keeping the international community on board, but also, keeping things locked down back home.
That's exactly the commentator's point. This balancing act is getting harder and harder by going so extreme. Saying no negotiations whatsoever. He's kind of limiting his options, and he risks alienating some of those international partners, the ones who are pushing for a diplomatic solution.
Yeah, it's like he's painting himself into a corner.
Right, and this is where the commentator brings up this really interesting analogy. They compare Zelensky and Putin to fish in a fishbowl. They say Zelensky's so focused on, the reactions of the people right there, right up against the glass, his base, his supporters, that he's missing the bigger picture.
Okay, I like that, the fishbowl analogy.
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty vivid.
Yeah.
But what do they mean exactly by missing the bigger picture?
Basically what they're saying is that Zelensky's getting caught up in this cycle of short-term thinking. He needs to look strong, he needs to look decisive, so he makes these bold pronouncements. But in the long run, they might actually hurt Ukraine more than they help.
So it's not just about, winning the war of words. It's about understanding how those words actually shape what actually happens on the ground, the real war, I mean.
Exactly. And the commentator, they think Zelensky's current approach, while it might work for a while, it could lead to some pretty disastrous consequences down the line.
Okay, yeah. It's a bit ominous. But before we get into all that, yeah. I mean, what about the Ukrainian people themselves? What are they like? How are they reacting to all this, this new, tougher Zelensky?
Well, it's kind of mixed, as you might expect. I mean, his supporters, they see him as a hero, courageous, standing up to this bully, to Russia. They're fired up by his defiance. To them, it's inspiring. But
There's always a but.
Yeah.
Right?
The commentator is a little worried, actually. They say that, this tough talk, this idea that they just have to keep fighting no matter what, it could be giving people false hope, especially those who are, being mobilized, sent to the front lines.
Whoa. Okay. That's a pretty heavy accusation. Are they saying like that Zelensky's rhetoric could actually be like getting people killed?
That's exactly what they're saying. And it all ties back to, the possibility of negotiation, something Zelensky's, totally rejected now.
But what if he really believes it's just not possible? What if this anger, this defiance, it's all like totally genuine?
I mean, it's possible, of course. That's a good question. But the commentator, they're not so sure because, see, this whole shift in Zelensky's tone, it kind of coincides with some whispers about a possible change in the U.S. administration, which could mean, more pressure to find some kind of negotiated settlement.
So the timing of this is well, it's a little suspicious.
Yeah, you could say that. The commentator thinks Zelensky's trying to, get ahead of the curve, make himself look like the hardliner, the strong man, both to his people and to the world, before anyone can try to force him into a compromise.
It's just a power play.
Yeah,
controlling the narrative.
Exactly. And then you've got this whole incident with Putin, what the commentator calls the hyperskin incident.
Hyperskin. Okay, I got to hear this. What's the hyperskin incident?
Okay, so Putin, he basically proposed this technological duel where Russia would use their hypersonic missile, the Kinzhal, which it means dagger, hence the nickname, hyperskin, on a target in Kiev. But the target would be chosen by Ukraine and the West.
Wow, that's taking things to a whole new level.
Yeah.
How did Zelensky respond to that?
I mean, he was furious, condemned it as a blatant threat, a sign of Putin's desperation. But the commentator points out this interesting inconsistency in Zelensky's reaction.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What inconsistency?
Well, they remind us that Ukrainian leaders, Zelensky included, have actually referred to Ukraine as a testing ground for Western weaponry before.
Right. Like as proof that the West's support is actually making a difference on the battlefield.
Exactly. So the commentator's like, wait a minute, is it really so hypocritical for Putin to propose a missile test when Ukraine itself has been presenting itself as a testing ground for Western arms?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Seems like a double standard there.
Right. And then there's this other instance of Zelensky's kind of sharp rhetoric, the old fantasist comment.
Ah, yes. Where he basically says Putin's like out of touch with reality.
Exactly. But the commentator, they say that this could backfire too,
Yeah.
especially considering the ages of some of Zelensky's potential allies, like Biden and Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I see what they mean. Calling Putin an old fantasist might not go over so well with other leaders who are, also getting up there in years.
Right. Not exactly the most diplomatic move.
Right.
But the commentator's worried about Zelensky's strategy backfiring in an even bigger way. They say he could end up becoming a lame duck leader. Yeah. A lame duck leader. Basically, it means, someone who's lost their juice, their political capital. They can't really get anything done anymore.
So they're saying that all this, all this tough talk, while it might make Zelensky look strong right now, it could actually weaken him in the long run.
That's exactly what they're arguing. They say that by drawing such a hard line, he's kind of, backing himself into a corner, and it could end up alienating, some of his allies and just make it harder for him to actually lead effectively.
It's almost like he's playing chicken with the international community, daring them to blink first. But what if they call his bluff? What if this whole gamble just, blows up in his face?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The commentator, they think that if Zelensky keeps going down this road, he could end up really isolated, both at home and on the world stage. People in Ukraine might start to get tired of the war if they think there's no way out, and his international partners, they might lose patience with him if he just refuses to even consider negotiating.
Yeah, it's kind of bleak when you put it like that. And it makes that whole fishbowl analogy even more striking, Like he's so focused on winning over the people who are already, right there in the fishbowl with him, that he's forgetting about all the bigger forces out there.
Right. And those forces, they're the ones that are really going to decide what happens to Ukraine in the end. If Zelensky can't, if he can't adapt, if he just keeps fixated on looking tough, even if it hurts Ukraine in the long run, well, he could be leading his country into a real disaster.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy stuff. But you mentioned earlier that the commentator also has some thoughts about how the media, how some people are reacting to Zelensky's his whole new style.
Yeah, they're pretty critical of what they see as kind of this blind acceptance of everything Zelensky says. They say that a lot of people, they've gotten so caught up in the emotions of the war. This need for a strong leader, the hope for a decisive victory, that they've kind of lost the ability to really think critically about the situation.
It's like they're just they're buying into the narrative without really thinking about the consequences.
Exactly, and the commentator, they use this pretty strong word to describe it. They say people have become stupid because of the war.
Stupid. Okay, that's harsh. I mean, I'm guessing they don't literally mean like people's IQs have dropped or something.
No. They're talking about a kind of intellectual laziness. Like people just aren't questioning things anymore. They're just accepting whatever they're told. And the commentator thinks it's because the emotions are so high, so intense that it's clouded people's judgment.
So it's not about being unintelligent. It's about getting swept up in the moment. Letting your emotions, your hopes, your fears kind of take over and make it harder to see things clearly.
Exactly. And the commentator, they're worried that this lack of critical thinking is making things even more dangerous. People are just accepting whatever Zelensky says, even if it might be, even if it might end up hurting Ukraine in the long run.
They're seeing this gap, between the passion of the moment, this desire for a strong leader and a clear victory, and the reality of what a long and brutal war actually means.
Right. And they think the media is kind of making this worse, actually, because, a lot of the coverage is very, very emotional. Lots of dramatic stories, lots of appeals to patriotism, to anger, to fear, but not a lot of nuanced analysis.
So it's not just Zelensky they're criticizing. It's the whole information environment. Like the way the war is being presented to people is shaping how they think about it, how they react to it.
Exactly. They're basically calling for people to be more media literate, to be able to sort through all the noise and the propaganda and figure out what's really going on, to think for themselves.
It's a call for skepticism, for critical thinking, for not just accepting everything you see or hear at face value. Especially in times of war when there's so much misinformation flying around.
Right. And that's why I think this commentator's perspective is so important, because they're not just, bashing Zelensky. They're reminding us that we all have a responsibility to be informed citizens, to think critically about the information we're consuming, and to hold our leaders accountable, and that the media has a responsibility to provide us with accurate and nuanced information.
It's a reminder that the battles of war aren't just fought on the front lines, right? There's this whole other battlefield, this information battlefield.
Exactly. And in a way, that battlefield, it's just as important.
Yeah. And, the source brings up a really interesting point about how, on the one hand, Zelensky's like completely rejecting any talk and negotiations. But on the other hand, he's still totally reliant on Western support, right? Especially from the U.S. And the U.S., they might have different ideas about how to end this war.
Right. That's a key tension the commentator highlights. Zelensky's trying to play both sides, Yeah. He wants to look strong and defiant to his people, but he also needs to keep the West on his side, even if the West, is more open to some kind of negotiated settlement.
But can he really have it both ways?
The commentator, they have their doubts. They think that this kind of double game, it's going to get harder and harder to pull off, especially with the possibility of a new president in the U.S.
That's right. We haven't even talked about how that could change things. What happens if there's a new administration in the White House? How does that affect all this?
Well, the commentator thinks it could really shake things up. A new president might be less willing to just go along with Zelensky's his hardline stance. and more likely to push for negotiations.
So all this tough talk that's maybe winning Zelensky points back home, it could actually backfire on him if it alienates his most important ally, the U.S.
Yeah, that's the risk. And it goes back to that whole lame duck idea we were talking about. The commentator worries that Zelensky's kind of, pushing his luck, and he could end up in a situation where he's lost the support of both the international community and his own people.
That's not a good place to be. It's a high stakes gamble for sure, and one that could have some really bad consequences for Ukraine.
Yeah. And that's really what the commentator is trying to get us to see. They're saying, look, don't just focus on the surface level stuff, the speeches, the emotional appeals. Think about the long game. Think about what all this means for the future of Ukraine.
They're saying, don't just be a cheerleader. Be a critical thinker.
Exactly. Because in the end, the decisions that get made now, they're going to have a huge impact on what happens to Ukraine, to the people there for years to come.
Yeah, it's a tough lesson, really. Being a leader, especially in wartime, it's not just about, looking strong or being popular. It's about making the hard calls, weighing all of the different factors and then doing what you think is right for your people, even if it's not the popular thing to do.
Absolutely. And that takes, it takes a certain kind of thinking, a strategic mindset.
Yeah.
Which Zelensky, he doesn't seem to be showing a lot of right now, at least according to this commentator. They think he's gotten so fixated on the immediate stuff, the photo ops, the speeches, making himself look tough and decisive, that he's kind of lost sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, like he's playing checkers while everyone else is playing chess.
Yeah, exactly. He's making moves that might look good, in the short term, but they're not really taking into account all the other pieces on the board, so to speak. And the commentator, I think this could be really bad for Ukraine. They're saying that by just ruling out negotiations entirely, he's basically closing off one of the only ways to end the war, to stop the killing and start rebuilding country.
But what if he really does believe that negotiations are just not possible? What if he's convinced that this is it? This is the fight for Ukraine's survival, and there's just no other way.
I mean, it's definitely a possibility. But the commentator, they see something else going on here. They think Zelensky's rejection of negotiations, it's not just about what he believes deep down. It's also a political calculation.
Okay, so they're saying he's using this hard line, this no compromise stance to shore up his support back home, to make himself look like the only one who can stand up to Russia.
Right. It's a way to rally people around him, to silence the people who are criticizing him, to make himself seem like he's indispensable. Like Ukraine needs him now more than ever. But the commentator, they worry that this whole strategy, it's based on a false premise, like this idea that Ukraine can actually win a decisive military victory against Russia.
And that false hope, like we were saying before, it could just lead to more suffering, more death, and ultimately a much worse outcome for everyone in Ukraine.
Exactly. And it all comes back to, the commentator's main point, really. Zelensky's so focused on the short term, on looking strong and scoring political points, that he's not thinking about the long-term consequences.
So, for you, our listener, I think what we really want you to take away from this is that Zelensky's, this whole change in how he's talking about the war, it's complicated. It's not a simple story. It's about, the pressures of leadership, the power of words and stories, and how important it is to really think critically about everything, especially when things are as messed up as they are right now.
Right. And we have to be willing to question the things we're being told, to look beyond the surface and think about the consequences, the unintended consequences of actions, because finding a way to peace, to a future where Ukraine can heal and rebuild, it's going to take more than just just tough talk. It's going to take wisdom. It's going to take, a real strategic vision and a willingness to make tough choices, even when they're not popular.
And that's what a real deep dive is all about, right? Getting below the surface, challenging the easy answers, and hopefully giving you, our listeners, some things to think about, to ponder. So thanks for joining us on this one. And until next time, keep diving deeper.